Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 637, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Today is July 17th, 2024. A lot to talk about on today's show, including maybe the biggest lie that Joe Biden has ever told. I know that's a pretty high bar, but we'll get into it today, and you guys can let me know if you think Biden has told a bigger lie than this one. All right. You can share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. And of course, we are holding our summer fundraiser right now. Head on over to libertarianinstitute.org to support all the work I do. This show, all the articles I write, my daily news roundup, all produced through the Libertarian Institute. And you could get some great kickbacks. All of our books, we published 14 so far, including works in the past year by James Bouvard, Lori Calhoun, and Tom Woods. Tom Woods' book on the COVID crisis can be purchased at the Libertarian, or can be got as a free kickback from the Libertarian Institute by making a donation. So I'll head on over today, check that out, and make a donation if you can. You can also find my work and this show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of this show. Of course, that's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, and follow all my work through my Twitter handle at @KyleAnzalone_. Let's get into it today. And the first story up here is quite interesting. Raises lots of questions, maybe even raises more questions than gives answers about the most recent major political developments in the United States over the past couple of days. So this from Dave DeCamp, July 16th, antiwar.com. CNN reports claims Secret Service ramped up security based on intel of Iran plot against Trump. So CNN claimed on Tuesday that the U.S. Secret Service ramped up its security around Donald Trump in recent weeks based on intelligence from a single human source that Iran was planning to assassinate the former president, accusations Tehran rejected as unsubstantial and malicious. The report offered no new evidence for the claim and only cited unnamed people briefed on the matter. They said there was no indication that Thomas Matthew Krutz, the 20-year-old who tried to assassinate Trump over the weekend, had any connection to the alleged plot. The idea that the Secret Service had increased security around Trump has been a contestant since Krutz was able to get off multiple shots from a nearby rooftop that wasn't secure. The report connected the alleged Iranian plot to Trump ordering the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, who headed the Iran's Quds Force, a branch of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, or IRGC. In response to the report, Iran's mission to the UN said these accusations are unsubstantiated and malicious from the perspective of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Trump is a criminal who must be prosecuted and punished in a court of law for ordering the assassination of General Soleimani. Iran has chosen the legal path to bring him to justice. The IRGC officials occasionally vow they will seek revenge for Soleimani, who was assassinated on January 3rd, 2020, by a U.S. drone strike in Baghdad. But amid soaring tensions in the Middle East, Iran has been clearly trying to avoid war with the U.S., and killing a former U.S. president would be a quick way to provoke direct military confrontation. This year, Iran engaged in indirect talks with the U.S. in Oman to avoid escalation, and also pressured its Shia allies in Iraq to stop attacking U.S. bases after 3 U.S. troops were killed at Tower 22 in Jordan. When Iran launched a reprisal attack on Israel in response to the bombing of the Iranian consulate in Syria, Iranian officials said they warned the U.S. 72 hours in advance. The U.S. denied the claim, but Turkey and Jordan confirmed they were given advance notice, which would have gotten bad to the U.S. Iranians recently elected a reformist candidate as a president, that is Masoud Perzeshkian, who wants to engage directly with the U.S., even in the context of the likelihood of another Trump presidency, which marks a significant shift in Tehran's policy. So let's go through this. And I think the thing that stands out the most and that makes this story sound most unbelievable is that it was published by Natasha Bertrand in CNN, who has published quite a few false stories over the years. Now, the second major issue with this story is the idea that the Secret Service stepped up its security around Donald Trump in recent weeks. If anything, from the shooting over the weekend showed that the Secret Service security around Trump is fairly lax, if not downright negligent. And so this raises some serious questions. Now, I also have some serious questions about if Iran would actually want to do this. There's a couple issues here. One, Joe Biden really hasn't been any better on the Iranian issue than Trump. Now, of course, Trump did withdraw from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and impose crippling sanctions on Iran, but Joe Biden had promised to return to that deal that was initiated and was orchestrated by President Barack Obama when Joe was vice president. And so it seemed that Joe Biden returning to office, would return the Obama policies to office and would give us a return to the Iran nuclear deal. But not only did that never happen, Biden said that he wouldn't return to the Iran nuclear deal and wanted a stronger and longer agreement with Iran, which of course was a non-starter for Tehran. Additionally, the Biden administration has been fairly hawkish on Iran. Most of what they're trying to do in the Middle East is coalesce Saudi Arabia, bribe them into an alliance with Israel, the UAE, and other Gulf Arab states against Iran and the Shia militias of Iraq and Syria, as well as the Houthis in the Middle East, something that Tehran is certainly against. So I don't think the Ayatollah or any leadership in Iran are necessarily sitting around thinking to themselves that, boy, we're going to be screwed in 6 months when Donald Trump returns to the presidency of the United States. I think from their perspective, it's much like the Chinese or the Russians, which is meet the new boss, same with the old boss. We have some different maybe negotiation styles and things to deal with during the Trump presidency, but overall, we're not going to see a dramatic shift in the American policy. And so the idea that Iran would take the risk of attempting to assassinate Trump, and of course, the recent assassination attempt, which Iran seems to have absolutely nothing to do with, failed, empowered Donald Trump politically. And so, I struggle to find any reason that Iran would have actually wanted to take out Trump. Now, could there have been somebody within the IRGC who at one point in time said we should kill our former president, Donald Trump? Sure. There's, I'm sure, a lot of hatred for Trump in Iran, particularly over what happened to Soleimani, who was on a diplomatic mission at the time he was assassinated. But still, I don't think there's any reason to think that Iran was actually working on a plot to assassinate Trump. And so, again, this story seems to me to raise more questions than answers, but in big ways, it seems to have a lot of holes and really shines a negative spotlight on the Secret Service, if there's any truth to it at all. All right, next up here, this again, Dave DeCamp, July 16th, antiwar.com. Trump's VP pick Vance says Iran needs to be punched hard. So Senator J.D. Vance, Republican from Ohio, took a hawkish tone towards Iran in an interview following the news he had been selected as former President Trump's running mate for the November election. He told Fox News' Sean Hannity at the Republican National Convention on Monday, the most important part of the Trump doctrine of foreign policy is you don't commit American troops unless you really have to. But when you do, you punch, and you punch hard. A lot of people recognize that we need to do something with Iran, but not these weak little bombing runs, Vance said, apparently referring to Biden's strikes against Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. If you're going to punch the Iranians, you punch them hard. That's what Trump did when he took out Soleimani, he said, referencing the 2020 assassination. Vance claimed the assassination brought peace to the region, but the incident brought the U.S. and Iran to the brink of a full-blown war. Iran responded by firing a volley of missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq, which caused traumatic brain injuries, but didn't kill any Americans. 2 months later, in March of 2020, a rocket attack in Iraq in Iraq that the U.S. blamed on Iranian allied Shia militias killed 2 U.S. troops and 1 British soldier. Vance accused Biden of doing nothing about Iran. He said, you have the infrastructure these sitting there to weaken Iran, to strengthen our ally Israel. Joe Biden is doing nothing with it. Donald Trump would reinvigorate it. Discussing Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, Vance claimed Biden was not helping Israel, even though the president has provided huge amounts of military aid and significant political support. Joe Biden has done nothing to help our ally Israel. Joe Biden has made it harder for Israel to win that war. He has prolonged the war to take out Hamas, Vance said. He previously said Biden was micromanaging Israel's military operations in Gaza, signaling he favors giving Israel whatever they want. Vance discussed other foreign policy issues, including the conflict in Ukraine. He has been leading critic of the proxy war since he joined the Senate in 2022. He told Hannity that he believes Trump will be able to negotiate with Russia and Ukraine to bring the thing to a rapid close. The Ohio senator said ending the war in Ukraine would allow the U.S. to focus on the real issue, which is China. Vance described China as the biggest threat facing the U.S., which aligns with the views of the Pentagon. So, while there is some reason to be somewhat optimistic about the appointment of J.D. Vance as vice president, he certainly isn't Nikki Haley, Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, or many of the other names that have been suggested by the Trump campaign as someone former president might pick to be his running mate. And so at least we could hope that this would help to facilitate the end of the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, he only wants to end that war to ramp up confrontation against China and Iran and increase support for Israel, which all three are things that we are against here at Conflicts of Interest. All right, couple more stories on the situation in the Middle East now before we head to Ukraine to wrap up the show. This one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on July 16th. Israeli military says it is facing shortages of tanks and ammo. The Israeli Defense Forces said that it was facing a shortage of functioning tanks and shells. The admission came in a court filing explaining why the IDF was not allowing female tank soldiers in Gaza. On Monday, the IDF informed the Israeli High Court that many of its tanks were damaged during operations in Gaza, and the Israeli military added it was also facing a shortage of shells. So the case was started by female IDF tank soldiers who engaged in operations in southern Israel on October 7th, who had been denied requests to deploy to Gaza. So the filing from the IDF says the number of operational tanks in the corps is insufficient for the needs of war and conducting experiments of the deployment of women. We are working to increase the arsenal. The IDF has been recruiting extraordinarily large numbers to replace missing soldiers and cannot allocate manpower for such experiments while the war continues. The IDF says it will now allow female tank soldiers to serve in combat until at least November of 2025. Tel Aviv has deployed thousands of soldiers to destroy and occupy Gaza since October 7th. At least 38,000 Palestinians have been killed, as well as 320 Israeli soldiers. Thousands of IDF troops have also been injured. Israel relies heavily on the U.S. to supply its military. From October to December of 2023, Washington sent Tel Aviv nearly 14,000 tank shells. The Foundation for Defense of Democracy, FDD, assesses that Israel is incapable of producing enough tank shells to arm its own forces. Israel has used American-made shells and other munitions to hit civilian targets and kill innocent people throughout the Gaza Strip over the past 9 months. Still, the White House has refused to cut arms to Israel or condition future shipments on halting attacks on civilians. The shortage of tank shells could produce other problems for Tel Aviv. Israeli leaders have openly discussed invading southern Lebanon to drive Hezbollah several miles from the border. A lack of tanks could complicate those operations. Next up here, this one, another story I wrote for the Institute. Powerful Israeli minister calls on Netanyahu to annex West Bank. So this is Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, and he is demanding that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu take steps to thwart the creation of a Palestinian state, including annexing the West Bank if necessary. The hardline official wants to make the move in response to an expected World Court ruling against the Israeli settlement expansion. A Palestinian-controlled West Bank is essential to the two-state solution. On Monday, Smotrich told reporters, I hereby call on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, if the International Court of Justice in The Hague does decide that the settlement enterprise is illegal, to respond to them with a historic decision of applying sovereignty to the territories of the homeland. The ICJ is considering a case concerning the legal Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Over decades, Tel Aviv has displaced Palestinians and given their land to Israelis, creating Israeli settlement communities throughout the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan Heights. The ICJ is expected to rule against Israel on Friday, but the decision will be non-binding. The West Bank is a region of eastern Palestine coveted by Tel Aviv and many hardline Israelis. Creating settlements in militarily occupied territories is a violation of international law. This is something that has been recognized by the Joe Biden administration. Israeli settlement expansion has been at record levels since Smotrich assumed a post in the defense ministry, making him the de facto governor of the West Bank. Smotrich lives in one of these settlements and has claimed that Netanyahu is entirely on board with his plan to annex the West Bank. Since October 7th, Israeli settlers and occupation forces have driven thousands of Palestinians from their home in the region while approving several new settlements. Additionally, the armed Israelis have killed over 500 Palestinians in the West Bank. Smotrich explained that his actions are meant to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state through massive construction, regulation settlements, building roads, and other measures in the field. In May, the finance minister posted a video saying that the West Bank could be reduced to rubble in the same way as Gaza. And so this is incredibly disturbing for a couple of reasons. Smotrich is a very powerful Israeli minister, and it's not just because this is a guy who sits in the Netanyahu coalition on his right wing and would have the ability to dissolve Netanyahu's coalition should the prime minister, let's say, make a deal with Hamas to release the hostages in Gaza in exchange for ending the fighting there. But he is also someone who not only is a finance minister, and so he's done things to the West Bank over the past 9 months, like withholding the Palestinian tax revenue that Israel collects from the Palestinian Authority. Of course, this is problematic because it's caused the near financial collapse of the West Bank on several occasions, and the people of the West Bank are really hurting at this point, economically, financially. The situation there is very bad, and Smotrich has played a large part of that. But he has this additional dual role in the defense ministry where he is the occupation governor of the West Bank, and in that role he is approved, and this is since December of 2022, not October 7th. He has approved a record number of settlements, and a lot of these settlements are placed in strategic locations around the West Bank that really makes the West Bank a non-continuous territory for the Palestinians. Already, if you want to travel throughout the West Bank, and this has been documented by Israeli journalists, it takes hours and hours to move from city or village from city to village because of the Israeli military checkpoints, and it's extremely dehumanizing for the Palestinians in this process, as they are often subject to humiliating searches, very long wait times. That, they say the soldiers at the checkpoints are usually busy on their phones, taking videos, snapping selfies, stuff like that. And, the Palestinians are waiting in their cars. They're trying to go see family. They're trying to get to work, things like that. And the Israeli soldiers just care so little. They don't want the traffic to move. They want this to be inconvenient. Additionally, there are different little branches of the IDF, and there's a particular ultra-Orthodox faction that has operated in the West Bank and has been extremely brutal to the Palestinians there. The U.S. even considered sanctioning that body, but in response, Israel has actually shipped off some of their commanders. They gave them promotions and set them to the West Bank to Gaza to commit war crimes against the Palestinians there. So everything that's happening here is completely disgusting and very problematic, and should be stopped. All right, let's get into that big Biden lie I was talking about. Biden claims he's done more for the Palestinian community than anyone else. And yes, that is a quote. President Biden claimed in an interview published on Monday that he has done more for the Palestinian community than anyone else, comments that came after 9 months of his administration supporting Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. He said on the YouTube show 360 with Speedy, "I'm the guy that did more for the Palestinian community than anybody else." An example of what he's done for the Palestinian community, Biden explained, "I'm the guy that opened up all the assets. I'm the guy that made sure the Egyptians got the Egyptians to open the border to let goods and medicine through." However, Biden has also backed the Israeli occupation to capture the Rafah border crossing of the Egypt-Gaza border, and it has been closed ever since. Biden also appeared to suggest in the interview that he has only provided defensive weapons to Israel, even though his administration has shipped thousands of bombs and other types of munitions. Biden claimed, "I sent defensive weapons. I denied them offensive weapons, that they were using 2,000-pound bombs and the rest. I made it clear that they cannot use the weapons that we provide to them, in fact, use them in civilian areas." The president appears to be referring to his administration pausing the shipment of 500-pound and 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. However, the 5,000-pound bombs have been approved to be delivered, despite Israel continuing to drop heavy munitions on civilians. While the administration did pause a single shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, it shipped 14,000 of them to Israel before that. Israel is still using the heavy munitions on civilians, as Israeli officials told Axios that the military dropped 5 2,000-pound bombs on the al-Mawasi tent camp city over the weekend in a strike that killed at least 90 Palestinians, including many women and children, at least half. Israel said the strike was targeting Mohammed Daif, Hamas's senior military commander, but Hamas denied the claim, saying it was an excuse to massacre civilians. In the interview, Biden expressed strong support for Israel and the idea of Zionism. He said, "Do you know what Zionism is? If there weren't an Israel, every Jew in the world would be at risk. There needs to be a strong and need for Israel to be able to have, after World War II, the ability for Jews to be able to have a place that's their own. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist," he said. And this is the most disgusting part of the lie, right? They always want to say, "Oh, the Jews need to be able to have their own state." And they just pretend that these Palestinians hate the Jews, that they just hate the Jews, and that's why they don't want the Jews to be there. Not that the Jews came in and took the Palestinian state from the Palestinians, displaced them, subjugated them, impoverished them, murdered them, killed their children, arrested their children, tortured them, right? This is the problem with Israel. Not that there needs to be a safe place in the world for Jews, which if Joe Biden is the president of America, he can make sure that America is a safe place for Jews to live, but he can't go to another place in the world where there's already people, there's already a state, there's already Palestine, go there and then say that this is where the Jews are going to live safely. That's just ridiculous. There's Palestinian people. Where do the Palestinian people live safely, Joe Biden? He has no answer for that, of course. He just claims that he's a giant Zionist because that's what he's believed for 50 years, and he's an idiot, and now his brain is crippled. So Lily Greenberg Call, a Jewish American who resigned from the Interior Department over Biden's support for the slaughter in Gaza, criticized Biden for frequently claiming that without Israel, Jews wouldn't be safe. She said, "Jewish safety cannot and will not come at the expense of Palestinian freedom. Making Jews the face of the American war machine makes us less safe." And that is certainly true. Everything Israel has done in the West Bank and stuff like that has made the Jewish people less safe. All right, one from our good friend at antiwar.com, Jason Ditz. Israeli strikes killed 5 civilians, including 3 children in southern Gaza. The Lebanese security sources revealed that multiple Israeli strikes carried out across southern Lebanon today killed 5 civilians, notably all Syrian nationals. An air raid on the farmland of Tut killed 3 Syrian children. Israel has regularly attacked southern Lebanese farmland, badly damaging the largely agricultural economy, while simultaneously talking up an invasion of that country. Lebanese national news agencies reported that Israel also attacked a motorcycle, killing 2 Syrian civilians who had been swimming in the area. A second strike carried out against the site as rescue workers attempted to approach. Israel further carried out attacks against towns and villages across southern Lebanon and fired phosphorus shells against the towns of Deir Menis and Beni Hayang. Israel has increasingly been using phosphorus against civilian targets. Hezbollah responded to the killings by firing some 40 rockets against northern Israel's Galilee panhandle. Some of those rockets were reported intercepted by Israeli forces, and there were no reports of any casualties. Israel and Hezbollah have been trading near daily strikes for months, with the attacks escalating in recent weeks, and Israel talking about expanding operations to an invasion of Lebanon. At least 511 people have been reported killed in Lebanon, including over 100 civilians. And much like the West Bank, it doesn't get enough attention, but there has been a lot of violence in Lebanon. Again, over 500 killed in Lebanon and 500 killed in the West Bank over the past 9 months. All right, let's turn our attention to Europe here for a minute. Members of the European Parliament want to punish Hungary for Orban's peace mission. So dozens of members of the European Parliament are fuming over Hungarian President Viktor Orban's recent push for a peace deal in Ukraine, which he began when Hungary took over the rotating EU presidency. 63 members of the 700-seat European Parliament sent a letter to the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and other top European leaders, calling for Hungary to be punished for Orban's push for peace, which had involved trips to Kiev, Moscow, and Beijing. So the letter, according to Politico, says Orban undertook several diplomatic visits, notably to visit Putin in Russia, Xi in China, during which he intentionally misrepresented his empowerment. This requires real action, such as suspending Hungary's voting rights in the council, since practice has shown that mere verbal condemnations of this situation have no effect. European Union officials have insisted that Orban doesn't represent the European bloc, despite him taking over the presidency on July 1st. During his recent trip, the Hungarian leader stressed the need for dialogue with Russia, which has been a consistent position of his, putting him at odds with much of the European Union and NATO. Orban said at the Kremlin, "We cannot achieve peace without dialogue and diplomatic channels. I have experienced that positions are far from each other, but in terms of restoration of dialogue, the first important step was taken today. There are signs that Orban's efforts and the possibility of a future Trump presidency wanting to wind down the U.S. involvement in the war are having an impact." Ukrainian President Zelensky said this week that Russia should attend the next peace summit he organizes, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more now. This Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, July 16th. Kremlin wants clarification from Zelensky on peace summit. So on Tuesday, the Kremlin responded to Ukrainian President Zelensky saying that Russia should attend the next peace summit on the Ukraine war. The previous summit, held in Switzerland last month, was billed as a peace summit, but Russia was not invited to attend. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, according to TASS, the first peace summit was not a peace summit at all, so one must understand first what Zelensky has in mind. Zelensky used the Switzerland summit and previous similar meetings to push his peace formula, which calls for a complete Russian withdrawal from Ukraine before peace talks could even start, a non-starter for negotiations from the Russian perspective. The Ukrainian leader also suggested that Russian representatives could attend the next summit, marks a shift in his position, as he has previously refused to engage with Moscow and even signed a decree into law that said that no talks with the Putin government were allowed whatsoever. The Ukrainian leader's suggestion that Russia representatives could attend the next summit marks a shift. Zelensky's comments came after Hungary's President Viktor Orban visited Kiev and suggested that the Ukrainian leader consider a ceasefire with Russia to foster negotiations. The Ukrainian leader publicly rejected the idea, but his suggestion that Russia attend the next summit suggests he could be softening his position on talks. The only time serious talks between Russia and Ukraine were held was in the early days of the war. In March of April 2022, the two sides held negotiations and a potential deal was on the table. However, the U.S. and other NATO countries discouraged the negotiations and promised to fund the war. All right, and the last story up here today. Belgorod governor says Ukraine has killed 200 civilians in the region since 2022. So the governor of Russia's Belgorod Oblast said Tuesday that the Ukrainian attacks on the border region since February 2022 have killed over 200 civilians. Back in April, he said the death toll was 120. In February, the UN estimated that at least 10,582 civilians have been killed in Ukraine and Russia since Russia launched its invasion. Civilian casualties in Belgorod have spiked in recent weeks as Ukrainian shelling and drone attacks have increased after Russia launched its new offensive in the Kharkiv Oblast. The governor said in a video on Telegram that civilian access to 14 villages near the border was being restricted due to an uptick in Ukrainian attacks. I hope you will agree it is unacceptable to let women and civilians into settlements that are shelled every day. We have already lost a lot of civilians. We have a lot of wounded, and of course our task is to maximize security measures. Throughout the war, Kiev has targeted residential areas of Belgorod with artillery shelling and drone attacks. The U.S. recently gave Ukraine the green light to strike Russian border regions with U.S.-provided weapons, but there haven't been reports of American-made missiles killing civilians in Belgorod. Militia fighters in Kiev, including the neo-Nazi Russian Volunteer Corps, have also launched cross-border raids into Belgorod and have been armed with NATO weaponry, including U.S.-supplied armored vehicles. All right, everybody, that'll do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And if you can, head on over to the Libertarian Institute and make a donation. Help us meet our fundraising goals today.